Officer Marcus Thompson adjusted his crisp uniform as he took his position outside Buckingham Palace. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard. Tourists were already gathering behind the barriers, cameras ready to capture the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Marcus had been part of the royal guard for 8 years, and he took immense pride in his duty to protect the royal family and maintain the dignity of the monarchy. As he stood at attention, his trained eyes continuously scanned the crowd. Years of experience had taught him to notice the smallest details, a nervous gesture, someone avoiding eye contact, or unusual behavior that might signal trouble. Today felt different somehow, though he couldn't put his finger on why. The crowd seemed typical enough: families with excited children, elderly couples on holiday, and young tourists snapping selfies. That's when he noticed her. A young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with tangled brown hair and clothes that looked like she'd been wearing them for days. She wasn't with the other tourists taking pictures or chatting excitedly about the palace. Instead, she stood apart from the crowd, her small hands pressed against the iron railings. Staring intently at a white van parked across the street, Marcus felt his training kick in. Something about the child's behavior triggered his protective instincts. She wasn't looking at the palace, the guards, or the spectacle that had drawn everyone else there. Her entire focus was on that van, and there was an urgency in her posture that made his chest tighten with concern. The girl's eyes darted nervously between the van and the people around her. She seemed to be searching for someone, looking over her shoulder repeatedly as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Marcus noticed she was barefoot, her small feet dirty and cut from walking on rough surfaces. Her thin frame suggested she hadn't eaten properly in some time. Without breaking his formal stance, Marcus used his peripheral vision to observe the van more closely. It was an ordinary white transit van, the kind used by tradesmen and delivery services throughout London. Nothing obviously suspicious about it, but the girl's intense focus on it was deeply troubling. He could see movement inside the vehicle, shadows shifting behind the tinted windows. The morning crowd continued to grow, with more families arriving for the spectacle. Tour guides were explaining the history of the ceremony in multiple languages, but Marcus tuned out the familiar routine. His entire attention was now split between maintaining his ceremonial duties and watching this mysterious child who seemed so out of place among the cheerful tourists. The girl suddenly moved closer to the barrier, her small fingers gripping the metal bars so tightly her knuckles turned white. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, looking around nervously. Whatever she wanted to say, she was clearly struggling to find the courage. Marcus could see tears forming in her eyes, and his heart began to race with the realization that this child was in real danger. As a member of the Royal Guard, Marcus was trained to remain motionless and silent during his duty, but every instinct screamed at him that this situation required immediate action. The girl's desperation was palpable, and the way she kept glancing at the van suggested she was running out of time. He had to make a choice between protocol and protecting an innocent child who clearly needed help. The weight of his responsibility pressed down on him. He represented centuries of tradition and royal protocol, but he was also a human being who had sworn to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As he watched the girl gather her courage to speak, Marcus prepared himself to break every rule he'd been taught about maintaining his post. Knowing that some things were more important than ceremony, the girl finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Please," she said, her small hands shaking as she gripped the barrier. "Please help me. They took my sister." Marcus felt his blood run cold. Despite his training to remain perfectly still, he found himself leaning slightly toward the child, his protective instincts overriding years of ceremonial protocol. The girl's words hit him like a physical blow, confirming his worst fears about the situation unfolding before him. "She's in that van," the girl continued, pointing with a trembling finger toward the white vehicle. "The men said they're taking us somewhere safe, but Sarah started crying and they got angry. They put tape over her mouth and pushed her inside. I ran when they weren't looking." Tears were now streaming down the girl's dirt-stained cheeks. Marcus could see the genuine terror in her eyes, and he knew without a doubt that she was telling the truth. His mind raced as he tried to process the information while maintaining his outward composure. Child traffickers? Operating in broad daylight? Just meters from one of the most secure locations in London. The crowd around the girl continued their normal tourist activities, completely unaware of the drama unfolding. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders for better views. Teenagers posed for photos, and elderly visitors consulted their guidebooks. The girl's desperate plea had gone unnoticed by everyone except Marcus, who felt the crushing weight of being her only hope. Marcus asked quietly, his lips barely moving as he spoke. Years of practice had taught him to communicate without appearing to break his ceremonial stance. "Emma," she whispered back. "My sister is Sarah. She's only 6. The men said they would take us to see our mom, but something felt wrong." Sarah was scared too. Marcus's jaw tightened as he absorbed the details. Child traffickers often use the promise of reuniting families to lure vulnerable children into their control. Emma's instincts had saved her, but her younger sister was still trapped in that van. Probably terrified and confused about what was happening to her, through his peripheral vision. Marcus could see more movement in the van. The engine had started, and exhaust fumes began to drift from the tailpipe. They were preparing to leave with Sarah inside. Every second that passed meant the little girl was being taken further from safety, and deeper into a nightmare that might never end. Emma pressed her face against the barrier, her voice becoming more urgent. "They're starting the van. Please, you have to help Sarah. She doesn't understand what's happening. She just wants to go home." The desperation in her voice tore at Marcus's heart. He could see the van beginning to pull away from the curb, merging into the London traffic. In moments, it would disappear into the maze of city streets, and Sarah would be lost forever. The weight of his uniform suddenly felt like a prison. Constraining him from taking the action his conscience demanded, other members of the Royal Guard stood at their posts nearby, maintaining their ceremonial positions with perfect discipline. Tourists continued to admire their stillness and dedication to duty. But Marcus knew that true duty sometimes meant making the hardest choice of all. Choosing humanity over protocol. His radio crackled softly with routine communications, but he knew he couldn't wait for official channels. By the time he could properly report the situation and coordinate a response, the van would be gone. And a 6-year-old girl disappear into a world of unimaginable horror. Emma looked up at him with eyes that held a wisdom far beyond her years. The kind of understanding that comes from experiencing things no child should ever have to face. "Please," she said one more time. "She's all I have left." In that moment, Marcus made his decision. Some rules were meant to be broken when innocent lives hung in the balance. He took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to do would change everything, but also knowing that he would never be able to live with himself if he let that van drive away with Sarah inside. Without hesitation, Marcus broke from his ceremonial position and sprinted toward the van. The sudden movement sent shockwaves through the crowd of tourists who had never seen a royal guard abandon his post. Cameras flashed and people pointed in confusion, but Marcus blocked out everything except the white van that was slowly pulling into traffic. "Stop. Police!" he shouted at the top of his lungs, his powerful voice cutting through the morning air. The van's brake lights flickered for a moment, and Marcus felt a surge of hope that the driver might comply. But instead, the vehicle suddenly accelerated, tires screeching against the asphalt as it sped away from the palace. Marcus activated his radio as he ran, his breath coming in short bursts. "Control, this is Thompson. Emergency situation. White transit van. Registration unknown. Heading east on the mall. Child abduction in progress. Request immediate backup and roadblocks." The response crackled back immediately. "Thompson, return to your post. This is highly irregular. There's a 6-year-old girl in that van." Marcus interrupted, his voice filled with urgency. "2 sisters approached me. One escaped, the other is still captive. This is not a drill." Behind him, Emma had managed to slip through the crowd and was running after him, her small legs pumping as fast as they could carry her. "That's the van," she shouted, pointing as the vehicle turned onto a side street. "Sarah's in there." Marcus reached the street corner just as the van disappeared from view. but he could hear the engine roaring as the driver tried to escape through London's congested traffic. He knew the area well from years of patrol duty, and he quickly calculated the most likely escape routes. If they were heading toward the river, there were only a few bridges they could use to cross into. South London, his radio came alive with multiple voices as the emergency protocols kicked into action. All units be advised. White transit van, possible child abduction. Last seen heading east from Buckingham Palace area. Armed response units dispatched. Metropolitan police car rounded the corner with sirens wailing, and Marcus flagged it down. The window rolled down to reveal Sergeant Patricia Mills, whom he recognized from Joint Security Operations. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing off your post?" she demanded, but her tone shifted when she saw his expression. "Wait, this is the child abduction call?" "Get in," she ordered, pushing open the passenger door. Marcus helped Emma into the back seat before jumping in himself. The little girl was shaking with fear and exhaustion, but her eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, searching for any sign of the van that held her sister. "They turned onto Victoria Street," Emma said, her voice small but determined. "I saw which way they went." Sergeant Mills hit the accelerator, and the police car surged forward with lights flashing. She grabbed her radio with one hand while steering with the other. "Control, we have the witness with us. Female child, approximately 8 years old. She's directing us toward the suspect vehicle." The radio crackled with updates from other units positioned throughout central London. Traffic cameras were being monitored, and police helicopters were being scrambled. But Marcus knew that time was their enemy. The longer Sarah remained in that van, the further away she would be taken from any hope of rescue. Emma suddenly sat up straight in her seat. "There," she cried out, pointing through the windshield. About 3 cars ahead, stuck in traffic at a red light, was the white van. Marcus could make out 2 figures in the front seats, and his heart pounded as he realized they were so close to Sarah. "That's it," Marcus confirmed, his training taking over as he assessed the situation. 2 adult males visible in the front. "Can't see into the back from this angle." Sergeant Mills immediately radioed their position while carefully positioning the police car to block any escape routes. Other units were converging on their location, but the traffic light was about to change. And if the van managed to get through the intersection, they might lose them again in the maze of London streets. Emma pressed her face against the window, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Sarah's in there. She must be so scared. She doesn't like dark places, and she cries when she's alone." Now, Marcus felt his resolve strengthen even further. He had made the right choice in breaking protocol. No ceremony or tradition was worth more than the life of an innocent child. As the light turned green and the van began to move forward, he prepared himself for whatever action would be necessary to bring Sarah home safely. The van lurched forward as the traffic light changed, but its escape was immediately blocked by 2 police cars that had positioned themselves strategically at the intersection. More police vehicles arrived from different directions, creating a tight perimeter around the suspect vehicle. The kidnappers were trapped with nowhere to run. Marcus watched tensely as armed police officers emerged from their vehicles, taking defensive positions behind their car doors. The situation had escalated quickly, and now Sarah's life depended on how carefully they handled the next few minutes. One wrong move could result in tragedy. "Stay in the car, Emma," Sergeant Mills instructed firmly. "We're going to get your sister back, but I need you to stay safe." Through the police car's windshield, Marcus could see the van's occupants becoming agitated. The passenger door opened slightly, then slammed shut again as the men inside realized they were completely surrounded. The driver revved the engine desperately, but there was absolutely nowhere to go. Inspector James Crawford, the senior officer on scene, raised a megaphone to his lips. His voice echoed across the busy intersection, causing pedestrians to stop and stare at the unfolding drama. "This is the Metropolitan Police. Turn off your engine and exit the vehicle with your hands visible. You are completely surrounded. Do not make this situation worse for yourselves." The van remained motionless for several tense seconds. Marcus could feel his heart pounding as he imagined what must be going through little Sarah's mind inside that dark vehicle. She was probably confused and terrified, wondering why strangers had taken her away from everything familiar. Suddenly, the back doors of the van burst open and a man jumped out. immediately raising his hands above his head. He was quickly surrounded by police officers, who ordered him to the ground. But the van's engine was still running, and Marcus realized with growing alarm that the driver was still inside with Sarah. "There's still someone in the driver's seat," Marcus called out to the officers. "The child is definitely in there." Inspector Crawford approached the van's driver's side window, his weapon drawn but pointed down. Through the radio, Marcus could hear him trying to establish communication with the remaining suspect. "We know you have a child in there with you," Crawford's calm voice carried across the scene. "Let her go, and we can work this out peacefully. Nobody needs to get hurt today." Emma pressed against the car window, her small hands leaving prints on the glass as she watched the drama unfold. "Why won't he just let Sarah go?" she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Marcus turned to face her, his expression gentle but serious. "Sometimes scared people make bad choices, Emma. But all these police officers are here to help Sarah. They're going to bring her home." The van's driver's side door finally cracked open, and everyone tensed. A man in his 40s stepped out slowly, his hands partially raised but clearly reluctant to surrender completely. Marcus could see the calculation in his eyes as he looked around at the police presence, probably weighing his limited options. Where's the child?" Inspector Crawford demanded, stepping closer but maintaining a safe distance. "She's fine," the man replied nervously. "She's just sleeping in the back. We weren't going to hurt anyone." But Marcus knew better. Child traffickers never admitted their true intentions, and sleeping often meant drugged or unconscious. His military training kicked in as he assessed the suspect's body language and demeanor. This man was dangerous and desperate, a combination that made him unpredictable. The suspect's eyes darted toward a gap between two police cars, and Marcus realized he was still considering an escape attempt. If he managed to get back into the van with Sarah, the situation could become a high-speed chase with a terrified child caught in the middle. "Don't even think about it," Inspector Crawford warned. Noticing the same thing Marcus had observed. "You're surrounded, and running will only make things worse for everyone, especially the little girl." At that moment, a faint sound emerged from the back of the van, a child's muffled cry. Emma heard it immediately and bolted upright in her seat. "Sarah!" she called out, though her voice couldn't possibly carry far enough for her sister to hear. "That's her. She's awake." The sound of Sarah's distress seemed to galvanize everyone at the scene. The time for careful negotiation was over. Inspector Crawford gave a sharp hand signal, and specially trained officers moved swiftly toward the van's rear doors. Marcus held his breath, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether this story had a happy ending or became a tragedy that would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. The specially trained officers moved with precision and speed toward the van's rear doors. Marcus watched as they positioned themselves strategically, ready to secure Sarah's safety the moment they had access to her. The remaining suspect, realizing his situation was hopeless, finally raised both hands fully above his head and dropped to his knees on the pavement. "Clear," one of the officers shouted as he yanked open the van's back doors. Inside, huddled in the far corner, was a small figure with blonde hair, Sarah. She was conscious but clearly frightened, her eyes wide with confusion and terror. Duct tape had been placed over her mouth, and her small wrists were bound with plastic zip ties. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was immediately followed by anger at what these men had put an innocent child through. Sarah's clothes were dirty, and she had been crying so hard that her face was streaked with tears and dirt. "It's okay, sweetheart," the officer said gently as he approached Sarah. "We're police officers. We're here to help you. Your sister Emma is waiting for you." At the mention of Emma's name, Sarah's eyes brightened slightly and she nodded vigorously. The officer carefully removed the tape from her mouth and cut the zip ties from her wrists. Being extra gentle to avoid causing her any additional trauma, "Emma." Sarah's voice was hoarse and small, but filled with hope. "Where's Emma?" "I want Emma." From the police car, Emma was practically bouncing in her seat with excitement and relief. "Can I go to her now?" "Please, she needs me." Sergeant Mills looked at Marcus, who nodded his approval. "Stay with me," she told Emma as she opened the car door. "We'll walk over together." The scene that followed would be etched in Marcus's memory forever. As Emma approached the van, Sarah spotted her and immediately began reaching out with her small arms. The officer lifted Sarah from the van and set her gently on the ground. Where the two sisters ran toward each other, their embrace was fierce and desperate. Two small children who had been through an unimaginable ordeal but were now safely reunited. Emma held Sarah protectively, whispering soothing words in her ear, while Sarah clung to her older sister as if she would never let go again. "I was so scared," Sarah sobbed into Emma's shoulder. "I thought I'd never see you again. They said bad things would happen if I cried." "It's okay now," Emma replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "You're safe. The nice policeman helped us. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." Marcus approached the sisters slowly, not wanting to overwhelm Sarah, who was already dealing with so much. When Emma looked up at him, her eyes were filled with gratitude that spoke volumes. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for helping Sarah." Inspector Crawford came over to brief Marcus on what would happen next. The two suspects were being arrested and would face serious charges related to child abduction and attempted trafficking. Social services had been contacted to ensure the girls received proper care and support. "These girls were lucky you acted when you did," Crawford said quietly. "Another few minutes and they would have been out of central London and much harder to track. Your quick thinking saved lives today." Marcus looked down at Emma and Sarah, who were still holding each other tightly. Despite everything they had been through, they had each other, and that bond had been strong enough to save them both. Emma's courage in approaching him at the palace, and his decision to break protocol to help her, had made all the difference. A female police officer approached with blankets and bottles of water for the girls. Social workers were also arriving on scene to begin the process of ensuring the sisters received all the support they would need to recover from their trauma. "What happens now?" Emma asked, looking up at the adults surrounding them with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Now we make sure you're both safe and healthy," the social worker replied kindly. "We'll find you a warm place to stay and people who will take good care of you while we sort everything out." Marcus knelt down to Emma's eye level, his expression serious but gentle. "You were very brave today, Emma. You saved your sister by asking for help when you needed it most. That took real courage." Sarah looked up at Marcus with wide, curious eyes. "Are you really a soldier who guards the Queen?" Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd had all day. "I am. And do you know what the most important part of my job is?" Sarah shook her head, waiting for his answer. "Protecting people who need help, just like you and Emma. That's what real soldiers do." 3 months later, Marcus stood at his post outside Buckingham Palace once again, but everything felt different now. The morning crowd gathered as usual, tourists excited to witness the ceremony and snap photos of the famous guards. However, Marcus's perspective on his duty had fundamentally changed since that life-changing day when Emma approached him for help. His commanding officer, Colonel Richardson, had called him into his office the day after the incident. Marcus had expected disciplinary action for breaking protocol and abandoning his ceremonial post. Instead, he found himself being commended for his quick thinking and dedication to protecting innocent lives. "What you did that day exemplified the true spirit of service," Colonel Richardson had told him. "Yes, you broke protocol. But you upheld something far more important, our duty to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The Royal Guard serves not just the monarchy, but the people of this nation." The incident had garnered significant media attention, with many praising Marcus for his actions. But for him, the real reward came in the form of regular letters from Emma and Sarah, who were now living with a loving foster family who had been working toward adopting them. Emma's latest letter was tucked safely in his uniform pocket. In her careful handwriting, she had told him about starting at a new school, making friends, and how Sarah was slowly recovering from the trauma of that terrible day. The sisters were receiving counseling and support, but their bond remained as strong as ever. "We think about you every day," Emma had written. "Sarah draws pictures of you in your red uniform, and she tells everyone at school that a real soldier saved us. Thank you for showing us that there are good people in the world who will help when we need it most." As Marcus maintained his ceremonial stance, he noticed a familiar sight approaching the palace gates. It was Emma and Sarah, holding hands with their foster parents, the Morrison family. They had written to ask if they could visit him during one of his duties, and he had arranged for them. to have special access to meet him during a break in the ceremony when the time came for the guard change. Marcus was able to step away from his post briefly. Emma ran toward him with a huge smile, while Sarah hung back shyly, still sometimes overwhelmed by crowds and new situations. "Officer Marcus," Emma called out excitedly. "Look how much Sarah has grown." Indeed, Sarah looked completely different from the terrified little girl he had seen that day. Her hair was clean and styled, she wore a pretty blue dress, and most importantly, her eyes held the spark of happiness that every child deserves. She approached him cautiously, but with growing confidence. "Thank you for saving us," Sarah said in her small, clear voice. "Emma told me you broke the rules to help us. That was very brave." Marcus knelt down to their level, his formal composure softening as he spoke to the girls who had changed his life as much as he had changed theirs. "You two are the brave ones," he replied. "Emma, you had the courage to ask for help when you needed it most. And Sarah, you survived something very scary and came through it stronger. That takes real bravery." Mr. and Mrs. Morrison approached, introducing themselves properly and expressing their gratitude for his actions that day. They were a kind couple who had opened their home to many foster children over the years, and they were in the process of formally adopting Emma and Sarah. "The girls talk about you constantly," Mrs. Morrison said warmly. "You've become something of a hero in our household. They know that when they're in trouble or need help, there are people like you who will step up and do the right thing." As their visit came to an end, Emma handed Marcus a drawing that she and Sarah had made together. It showed Buckingham Palace, with a tall figure in a red uniform standing guard, and two small girls holding hands nearby. At the bottom, in Emma's careful writing, were the words, "Heroes come in all shapes and sizes." Watching the family walk away, hand in hand, Marcus felt a profound sense of purpose that went beyond any ceremonial duty. He had learned that true service meant being ready to act when others needed help, regardless of the personal cost or the rules that might be broken in the process. That evening, as he removed his uniform and prepared to head home, Marcus reflected on how a single moment of choice had led to such a meaningful outcome. Emma's desperate plea for help had tested everything he believed about duty and protocol, but it had also shown him that the most important rules were the ones written in the human heart. The two men who had taken Sarah were now serving lengthy prison sentences, and their trafficking network had been dismantled, potentially saving countless other children from a similar fate. But for Marcus, the real victory was much simpler. Two sisters who would grow up knowing that when darkness threatens, there will always be people willing to stand in the light and fight for what's right. As he walked through the streets of London that evening, Marcus carried with him the knowledge that he had found the true meaning of being a guardian, not just of palaces and ceremonies, but of innocence, hope, and the fundamental belief that every child deserves to be safe and loved.